Democrats are so addicted to power. The purpose of their entire life is to control people. So when they lose, it's this existential disaster. And to me, that would mean the time for policy is now. Policy, policy, policy. But instead, I'm going to read you some stats after watching the DNC Monday night, tweeted out by the Trump campaign. They mentioned the economy 27 times throughout all of the speakers. They mentioned the border just 8 times. They mentioned crime 6, prices 5, and inflation just 3 times throughout the entire ordeal on Monday. But do you know what they mentioned 147 times? Mr. Donald Trump. So if that's not living rent-free, Mike, I don't know what is. What was your takeaway after Monday?
Well, to that point exactly, I think one of the funny points, I forget what news headline said, which newspaper ran with it, but the donkeys were talking about the elephant in the room, right? So they were definitely, hammered that message home. But what I found was a good way to encapsulate most of the night was it was a lot of pomp and circumstance. Again, that's usually the first night that you see at a DNC convention and things like that. For the most part, it seemed to drag on a little too long. Some people, were losing disinterest a little bit, and even pushed so late that Biden almost got canned, didn't make it on stage in time before the end of it, right? So yeah, that would be my take on it.
Yeah, I saw reporting that Biden was getting pretty frustrated and basically falling asleep because of his, they put a lid on his campaign. So going to 11 p.m., that's not easy stuff. But what I've found is ever since Kamala has launched her campaign and taken the reins here, there's been this shift in messaging where, one, the media wanted to run and call Trump and Vance weird every day. Weird, weird, weird. You'd see it 35 times a minute online. And now what I'm seeing, and I'm looking in front of me, I'll put it on the screen. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 headlines that all describe the Harris and Walz campaign as joyful. This is a joyful time. When we run on joy, we win. Seize the joyful messaging, and the Democrats are hosting this joyful campaign. So very, very strange the way that they're pushing these particular buzzwords, but really, again, forgetting to push forward anything of substance. So do you think Trump and Vance are actually weird, or are we thinking that might be Oppo research?
I think their analysts on both sides are just trying to play to their base here, right? So you have the Democrats are trying to program the other, side as weird and different than us, but I think they are trying to strike a different tone that the Republican Party is, right? So the Republican messaging is generally like we can't let the Democrats get into the office because they're going to do these bad things. I think the Harris-Walz campaign, at least what we've seen so far, and especially from the DNC, is that they're trying to create a more positive message, and they're trying to create, I guess, a stark contrast between the Trump campaign. Their base, or at least the people who are most recently excited, energized, the new registered Democratic voters, they're all generally a younger audience. They're not plugged into the news. So as much as I'm a policy pundit and junkie and I want to read about it, and I will give credit to the Trump campaign, you can go on their website. They have a very large, PDF document outlining the policies that they believe in. You're not going to find that on the Harris-Walz campaign website. And it was only just recently that they started teasing out what the exact details of that were. Like I said, is because their base isn't tapped in. I think they're just trying to go with imagery rather than policy at this point. And now they're using it to Trump's disadvantage for being a policy guy, is they're giving him, I guess, ammunition to try to attack him on and piecemeal at that.
Yeah, well, it's almost kind of like known, that these elections aren't even about policy anymore. And this has been decades in the works. It's a popularity contest. It's a who can throw more money on the street to set up booths to register more voters. And I really believe that's happening. Now, you just gave Republicans a little bit of credit. Donald Trump has very clear policy positions. They are not printed on the outside of his building on Fifth Avenue. That is a projection by the Democrats that have said Project 2025 on his building, the headquarters of Project 2025, when that is a lie, a fabrication. It is not. With that said, if you go through some of the themes of Project 2025, actually, I don't think they're as crazy as the media has reported on them. But as promised, you gave us a little nod. I'm going to give you guys a nod. The DNC did come out with their policy positions, at least the platform, I think it's called, that the party comes out with. And here's my knock on them. They forgot to do their editing. 19 times throughout that report does it say the Biden administration or the next Biden term.
Oh, boy.
So that is a little bit of a foible that they did there, which is probably angers Harris. I know I would be angry if that was the case. But in that document, one thing that they did well is they forgot, presumably, or maybe intentionally, to talk about cryptocurrency. I've been someone that's been in Bitcoin and follow crypto pretty closely, and it's folks like specifically even Elizabeth Warren has been saying how we need to shut this down. We need to regulate.
Right.
And actually that would be bad in general for Bitcoin, in my opinion. So the fact that they have no policy on it, actually maybe that's a good thing, because they'll either forget about it or won't try to regulate the heck out of it. Many of their policies are cutting red tape. Is anything that's standing out to you at this time?
Well, so I think it's pretty interesting because I like that you touched on cryptocurrency, because the Harris Waltz ticket is trying to thread this needle here. What they were doing all through, the DNC and recently is posturing themselves as not too progressive, a little liberal, but trying to create an Obama-like administration, right? We're just slightly center-left. Again, that's the imagery that they're trying to portray. And with cryptocurrency, you have two different wings of the party. You have someone like Elizabeth Warren, who's very adamantly against or staunchly for regulations of the industry. And then you have somebody like Chuck Schumer recently come out, who's more open to the idea of not necessarily just deregulation, but just more empathetic regulation to the industry, if you will. So like I said, it's interesting now, because now the Harris Waltz campaign has that. They have the immigration issue that they're trying to thread the needle on, right? And then they also have the war in Gaza issue that's front and center issue with the very far left progressive end of the party, and they're trying to give nods to that with AOC speaking. But the whole imagery, like I said, is trying to portray themselves as not too far left. It's going to be hard with the progressive end of their party.
Let me ask you, so we saw earlier in the week Palestinian protests, I guess, that are going on outside the DNC, or we should call them Hamas supporters, dare I say, that are kind of breaking through these lines of security, and I think a few got arrested. So wouldn't we think that Joe Biden was criticized recently for pulling back or kind of putting a pause on funding for Israel? I know that he recently reopened the floodgates with F-16s or F-22s or whatever it might have been, a couple billion. But hasn't Kamala changed the tone from what the Biden administration's stance on all this has been? Hasn't she kind of snubbed Netanyahu, if I'm correct? Do you remember that or know what I'm talking about?
So again, she's going to try to play to the establishment and not be too staunchly anti-Israel, but there's a very fine line that she has to walk to win over progressives who are very, very fickle voters that won't show up at the voting booth in November, that they desperately need to do so to make sure that her victory is there. She's made a lot of gains lately in the swing states, and if they don't show up, all of those gains will mean nothing.
Yeah, a lot of the people I follow don't choose to look at polls ever since 2016, when it was Hillary Clinton 60% and Trump like 30% chance of winning, and obviously Trump came out with the W that year. And because they don't look at the polls, well, they need some way to get a read on swing states and where the nation's at. So what they go to is the Vegas betting odds and the markets where people put their big money behind the outcome. And well, it turns out those are pretty studied individuals that are making those calls as well and placing those odds. So actually, as Kamala took over and Biden stepped out, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago now, she rocketed to about a 55% chance of winning. And only just yesterday or 2 days ago, definitely this week, that tide has turned once more, where Trump has eked or irked his lead up to 51% to 49%. I think it's so interesting how close it always is. And I will say this. It's always, I say this all the time, and I think it's like the greatest comparison. The Republicans, to me, are like the team that the Harlem Globetrotters plays every day or every week, because we are there to lose. It's not like, oh, it's neck and neck, we have this lead. It's like, okay, we're either tied or we're losing on the Republican side. And it's such as, I blame the media disparity in their way that they present the statistics. But, the fact that it is so close this year, maybe it really is an existential threat to democracy, But here's the big question of the night: is this DNC, where they are officially naming Kamala the nominee in 2024? Is it an election? Because nobody there has really casted a vote. They've all casted their primary vote, presumably for Biden. So is it actually just a coronation where we're elevating the queen to her throne and the outcome is predetermined? Come on, you got to give me that.
So it's a narrative that I don't hear from inside the left. It's a narrative that I hear from outside the left, because for the most part, and again, there were about 14 million primary voters who did not vote for Biden, who were either an opposition vote or some sort of, a protest vote of some kind. However, everyone who did vote for Biden Harris's name was also on that ticket. The presumption is if something were to happen to a Biden, or he chose to step down, she was in that next slot, right, to be the VP. So I don't know if people are too upset about it, but at the same time, those people, much like myself, were very despondent. We weren't very enthused with Biden. Post the first debate debacle, it really was looking very bad. I think there's two sets of enthusiasm that are going on in the Democratic Party. There's genuine enthusiasm. There's a lot of these younger voters, like I said before, who aren't tapped in daily to the news, or people who aren't like policy junkies and really like studying the platform. They just like the idea of a newer, younger candidate actually coming in. Again, she has plenty of uphill battles to fight to win over, a younger wing in the party, but it's someone different, and I think that that's excitement in general. And then there's people like me who are maybe not as excited for Kamala Harris, the character, or the policy, the politician rather, but just like I said, somebody different. It's just nice to be able to have somebody, a little more youthful, and we weren't. To me, the coronation was moving along with Biden, right? That felt like more of a coronation, if anything.
I'll hand it to you, Mike. That's actually a pretty good rebuttal, because it's true. You also, or the Democrats, I should say, were also not given a choice back in that primary. I mean, there were no people to run against him.
Right.
I pulled another news article here as we talk about the platform and disparities between media reporting, and there's two different headlines here by the same exact outlet, CBS News. I'm going to read the first one from a few months ago. Former President Trump's vow to stop taxing tips would cost the federal government up to $250 billion. Now, after this week, when Kamala has announced that she also is for stopping the tax on tips, their headline reads, Vice President Kamala Harris is rolling out a new policy position, saying she'll fight to end taxes on tips for service workers. But what happened to the $250 billion it's going to cost the federal government? To me, this is a cut and dry example of what Trump means when he says fake news. We would not be in the position today with a selection, not an election. We would not be in the position today with Trump being accused of felonies and what people on the right are accusing of partisanship, persecution. We would be in a healthy, normal civilization with discourse if we didn't have this media tearing us apart. Because guess what? They both say the exact same thing. They both want the same policy. And Mike, this is something you and I have talked about, where the president actually doesn't get that much say. They have to report to Congress. Right. The legislator makes the laws, not the president. So we're voting for this popularity contest, this figurehead. Then I haven't heard anything about down-ballot races, frankly. I'm curious who's going to run to represent Georgia, to represent Arizona. These were really hot-ticket states, and they're going to continue to be in these purple areas. So do you feel that people are focusing too much on the presidential race coming into November, if that's a thing?
So absolutely. It's very tight races across the board. The seats that are in play are not going to affect the majority in the House dramatically, but it's about like a 4 or 5 seat swing that again could push slightly, to a a slight majority to Democrats, or a slightly more secure majority for Republicans as it is. So again, it's not going to be like some sort of groundbreaking veto-proof majority on either side, but the handful of swing state seats here that are in play are something that the RNC chair has said to his candidates, it's something you're going to have to earn. It's absolutely winnable races, but you can't just be complacent, and you really have to fight for it. So it's definitely up in the air. And the Democrats find themselves not benefiting from a down the ballot kind of selection. So these are the people who, they're these swing state areas that are actually liable to the Democratic platform, right? They might be affected by immigration policies that they aren't perceived as effective, or were affected poorly by inflation, in these smaller states with lower incomes, right? That really hits home harder. So they're not going to benefit from a Harris platform or swing of any kind, at least that we don't foresee for right now.
Right. To me, that sounds like Southern California, Nevada, New Mexico,
correct,
Colorado, purple areas.
Right.
Very interesting point. I think that it's interesting that so many people are single issue voters, and I think that that's kind of a mistake. Maybe everyone has the right to vote who they want to vote for, but when you kind of are pushing for a candidate based on one thing, if your vote is based on solely on abortion legislation, I think you have to reevaluate why you're casting a vote. And if your vote is based solely on immigration legislation, then you really do need to be looking down ballot, because the president is going to either write an executive order or not, and that's where it stops, right? What we have seen actually is the executive stopping state action, which is kind of alarming as well, thinking if Texas wants to block their border, let Texas block their border. But I could see why that's a problem as well. So coming up on the DNC, obviously we're going to look forward to Kamala Harris giving us a speech and hopefully diving into more policies. Do you think she's just going to rail into Trump the whole time? Or how is she going to separate herself from the Biden track record, which I would imagine most of the country, if they're honest and, observant, they might say, hey, we're in a little bit of a problem, at least economically. How does she separate herself from that? Because she's enacted a lot of that.
Sure. I think G0 Media put it really well. They wrote, she's trying to turn vibes into victory. I think there's a lot of Republicans who are just dissatisfied with Trump as a choice. I know a few personally that will be voting for Harris, at least as it stands right now. And it's because of not dramatic policy differences. It's coming down to character, right? And I think that's a lot of what the younger, new registered Democrats that they're excited about and have joined the party and are even actually donating to the DNC. So what they're looking for are people who are turned on to a character. I don't know if she's going to get too much more into policy. It'll be, really romantic sounding in the moment when she ties it into a speech. But I do think that most of her public-facing speeches are not going to be the minutiae and granularity of all the policies and stuff like that. As you can see, it seems like some staffer was just copy and pasting most of the Biden, administration's platform in time to get something up, right? So I think that they're just going to try to run on vibes through the rest of the election, which is going to work to their benefit. And I think that the Trump campaign really needs to hammer home on certain policy issues. They're not going to win on calling Kamala Harris dumb or stupid or a DEI hire or questioning her blackness. It's just not landing that well. I think that they will succeed in attacking the Democrats on their weaknesses, and it's going to be immigration and inflation. Those are going to be the really two big issues that they can succeed well on, that they have the numbers and that people really feel in their pocket. The economy at the end of the day, people can feel a certain way, but your paycheck, when your paycheck's getting smaller and smaller, that's what really speaks at the ballot booth. Right,
but so just to push back, like what can she do to separate herself from the Biden's track record? Because it does seem to me like they're trying to correct the record, for example, and say she was never appointed the border czar. I don't think that title was just made up. I could probably Google news articles and see she was put in charge of solving the root cause problems down in Central America and Mexico, so we stopped this immigration problem. But that didn't happen.
How will she separate? Lofty promises that, aren't really entirely up to a president necessarily. It will require, legislation of some kind, or she might be able to use an executive order, but it'll be like a lot of the Obama executive orders. They're going to be symbolic. They only affect government workers, right? So it's not like large swaths of the economy and things like that. It will have some effect, but it'll be mostly symbolic in nature. Like I said, she's just going to try to ride vibes. I don't think, making a very poignant argument about how her policies are specifically different is going to help with her voters. I don't think that's what Republican voters want to hear, but I don't think that that's what the pitch is going to make. She's going to make, because those aren't her voters, right?
Yeah, you're right. And you made the same point with Trump talking about how he calls her a DEI hire. It doesn't appeal to anybody besides the farthest right of his base. Whereas if she were to then say how tout her successes from the Biden admin, that maybe she can't do that. But right, it's appealing to her far left side. So how do you appeal to the people in the middle? You and I, we thought that maybe it would come down to a vice president pick, or we were saying how these down-ballot races become very more important, but they're really not given the attention or the time and boots on the ground that might be needed to win those. I mean, I've been so let down by the vice president picks. J.D. Vance, Nicole Shanahan, who just said something very interesting this week, and now Tim Walz. I mean, these people are frankly, unimpressive. I don't think J.D. Vance has any track record. People are asking me my take. I'm disappointed by the take. He could have secured the middle of the country if Trump chose somebody that was a little bit more centrist. And then the same with Kamala. She could have picked someone. I mean, I think this entire election, and you can mark my words, is going to come down to Pennsylvania, and the electoral votes for Pennsylvania will swing it.
Absolutely.
And she didn't go ahead and choose Shapiro.
I saw that from the New York Times. Is it's all fun and games with Waltz. I'm probably paraphrasing this wrong, but it's all fun and games until you're 10,000 votes short in Pennsylvania, on election night, and you lose the electoral thing. So, and I think it might also have been another analysis from the Times too. I read was pretty good. Is that that not picking Shapiro speaks volumes, right? So he has a very magnanimous personality. It speaks to the weakness of her personality, that he might overshadow her as a vice president, right? So that's a weakness in her governance styles, that your VP has a stronger presence on the stage and even in governance itself. But also, too, I feel that there was absolutely a concern about the progressive end of the party, because maybe it's not anti-Semitic because he's outspoken, proudly in his faith, a Jewish person, but his outspoken support for the state of Israel. So that might be considered a liability. And they went with they went with Waltz for the Harris ticket to, I guess, try to be a moderating force, because there's this, older, maybe wiser looking, high school teacher, like hometown, kind of guy that to balance the ticket. But his progressive policies were, again, like try to nod to the far left. I just feel like they're trying to thread way too many needles for it to be a pretty piece of fabric, to continue the cliche.
It makes a tapestry. Let me ask you a question. Do you see a segment or a faction of the left that is anti-war, as the hippies were in the 60s and 70s? Does that exist? Or is I guess that's what we're seeing with the Palestinian protests, right? They would be considered the anti-war faction.
Sure. History rhymes. It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And we're seeing a lot of parallels to the anti-war movements then. It's very nuanced. There's differences for the causes, but fundamentally, right, that people, they see underdogs, they see oppressed peoples. They see, innocent kids and women and stuff, being caught in the carnage and cogs of history. And they don't want to see it anymore, especially when your taxpayers in some way, tax dollars as taxpayers are some way financing it. So that's the problem with the party, especially coalitions within your party. She's going to have to figure out a way to reconcile that. She did speak on it a little bit. Having AOC that night, to talk about it was, a good nod to that end of the party. But she, like I said, it has a big uphill battle in that regard, and that is going to be one of their biggest weaknesses moving forward.
Yeah. A lot of people on the right accused the Biden administration of being essentially a puppet regime controlled by the Obamas. And I always thought that was a little bit awkward, a little bit strange. They're getting paid $50,000 for speaking gigs, and they're paddleboarding off of the coast of Martha's Vineyard. But the question remains, is the Obama family, who is also speaking this week or has spoken at the DNC this week, are they really pulling the strings? Are they in charge? Do you think that Kamala, who's trying to mirror, you've even said it, this Obama-esque change.org kind of, campaign, is the Obama family that influential in the Democratic Party still, or is that a lot of smoke?
I think absolutely. And I think the difference between the Republican and the Democratic Party is the Democratic Party, those kingmakers, they have more celebrity status. They're more public facing, they're more public figures. Whereas the kingmakers and power brokers in the Republican Party are not necessarily so. They don't want to be famous, or maybe they're just not, they have that same celebrity status. So I do think that the Obamas definitely still pull a lot of weight, and as well as, the Clinton family. So, the establishment end of the party, as much as the progressive end of the party, hold a lot of weight there, and they need to reconcile those coalitions into the election.
Yeah. I guess more than anything, they just command these audiences. Even my mom said that she shed a tear when Hillary Clinton was speaking, and that really resonates. It wasn't Kamala that was speaking. My mom probably doesn't know much about what Kamala's policies are, as we all say. We really don't know what they are. But she's definitely secured that vote because of the vibes. So
exactly.
Yeah, hey, it's very interesting. All right, so the last thing I'm going to say is, did you ever expect RFK and his vice president to go and support the Donald Trump campaign?
No, that's a good final note to leave off on. It's not something that I would have expected, but it kind of makes me question what their motivations were all along. But just for context for our viewers, right, is the VP, Shanahan of the campaign, talked about their consideration of dropping out and supporting and possibly even becoming a part of the Trump campaign and administration.
Yeah. So it sounds like they have the ability, if they reach 5% of the general election vote, that would allow them to access federal funding in the tune of tens of millions of dollars in order to establish their own party, which is pretty interesting. Something I'm going to look a little more into, because I've not really heard of that. I thought you could just make a political party, but I guess this is from the FEC funding. But then they said if they don't think that they're going to pull 5%, that they're going to drop out and endorse Trump. Wow, I would have truly expected the exact opposite of that. So It was a little bit refreshing to hear that. My meter has been going left to right. I really thought Trump was not looking great. And then when Kamala came in, I said, oh my God, it's really not looking great. But a comment like that from Nicole Shanahan and the centrist, quote unquote, party of RFK, that's very, very interesting to me. And that I'm not changing my stance yet, but that could change my stance. That honestly could, as we head into the next couple of weeks.
Absolutely, yeah. Just to wrap up, not too long ago, Biden saw himself accepting the nomination from the DEC. And here was this entire passing of the torch, very emotional ceremony, mind you. But, like I said, it's in a complete turn of the tables that you would have never expected. And if that can happen, anything else could happen. And this is surely does not bode well for, the Democratic campaigns as they move forward with that kind of a switcheroo.
Yeah, well, hey, as we get closer to November, we will be sure to keep you guys updated. We're going to try to do more of these extemporaneous episodes where we just keep up on what is happening this week in the news so you don't have to read it, because please turn that TV off. Go build a garden, as Lucas Nelson says. Hey, this has been Elevated Thoughts.